On the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine.
Good morning, everyone. Nick Barris here. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Yes, indeed, this is Wednesday. And I don't know. I mean, I want to know from you if you've ever been to the doctor or the hospital and you've had a situation after whatever treatment, or maybe a loved one or a friend has gone through, you wonder, were things done properly? Okay. The question of medical malpractice and whether or not you may have a case, if something was done to you wrong or not. We hear more of this type of stuff happening at the same time. I think it's safe to say it's more difficult to sue than ever before because of some of the changes to the law. But it's something we all need to be concerned with. I'll tell you right now, well, who likes to go to the hospital? No one. But at the same time, if I get sick and I've got one thing, I'm going to be a little afraid going to a hospital these days because I'm going to get sicker there. There's sick places, and that's not a knock necessarily on them. There's a lot of sick people there. But, things happen, either sometimes in doctors' offices, treatments, hospitals. I want you to think about it. And joining the conversation this morning as we talk about medical malpractice, you see the number on the screen if you want to jump in, because we can help you determine whether or not you may have a case. Not me, really. It's the guy sitting next to me, Clint Kelly. Good morning to you,
Morning,
sir.
Nick. How you doing?
It's nice to have you on, as always. Clint Kelly, regular guest of ours, and he is an attorney here in town, specializes in medical malpractice. There are attorneys out there that might take on malpractice cases, but they're more general practitioners. I always like to specify that these are the only cases you handle.
That's right.
Meaning you have to have a special certification, or obviously you don't have to if other lawyers can do it, but you are certified to do these cases, and maybe what gives you a cut above?
Correct, because I've got experience in trying a minimum of 10 of these to a jury trial. I've tried more of them, but that's the minimum, and then I have to take an oral exam and a written exam, and then I have to be recommended by other peers who do this type of work on a regular basis, and then there's a professional liability association that then certifies us, and we maintain that certification annually. And there's a handful of us here in the Middle Tennessee area, and maybe 20 or so of us across the state.
Wow. Don't you ever just get the itch to go do some criminal law and prosecute a bad guy? No.
That's not my gig.
That's not your gig. No. Now, I will say, sometimes some of the cases I've dealt with you before, aside from the civil aspect, which you handle, I look at the case and I think there's something almost criminal here. Do your cases ever result potentially in criminal cases if there's gross negligence?
I've had gross negligence cases. I have not had one, to my knowledge, that's resulted in a criminal prosecution, although there's a couple that probably should have.
Yeah, you see some of those. Well, what we like to do is lay out the guidelines for you as you sit at home and listen to this, and I always like him sharing some of the cases he's dealing with without getting into the names of those to protect the innocent. But let's just talk about the basics again real quickly. Malpractice, a malpractice suit. How do you know if you may or may not have one? It's not enough if you just have a negative result from a doctor visit, correct?
Right. They call that a bad outcome, and there are bad outcomes. The question is the bad outcome the result of a major medical mistake? And does that cause major injury or major damages? You've got those two things, and you've got a lawsuit, potential lawsuit. Assuming that an expert will sign off on it, that would be a physician who looks at the care and decides that there's been inadequate or bad care.
Okay, standard of care is what you taught me.
That's
all right?
right.
It's basically, you look at it, if something came out wrong, you have to have someone look at it and say, well, look, they didn't do what most physicians in this situation should have done. Is that the key?
That's exactly what it is. We call it standard of care. That's what doctors call it. But really, if you want to get right down to it, they're rules, and were the rules violated?
In your opinion, based on your experience, and how many years have you been doing this?
20.
I mean, you're a very young man, but 20.
20. Seems like a lot of years when you look back on it.
Yeah, 2 decades worth.
Yeah.
What do you think are the most common cases that you encounter for malpractice in the biz?
Misdiagnosis.
Misdiagnosis?
Primarily. Misdiagnosis, and also post-surgical problems. Issues that occur after a surgery where there's either an infection or a blood clot or some other type of, a lot of times after spinal surgery, some type of neurological injury that occurs after the surgery and it's missed, and what starts out as a campfire turns into a forest fire, and it can't be managed, and then it results in some type of major impairment or in some cases death.
Okay, as you say, it's got to be major impairment, death. A misdiagnosis, it has to have, for you to seek damages, something that really affects someone's life. You can be wronged and have a problem, but maybe bounce back from it and be fine.
Right.
And you're not going to win any money in a case like that because, yeah, maybe there's some mental suffering, but how are you going to prove that half the time, right?
That is difficult to prove. Usually, in particular in these cases, you want a physical injury, a substantial one. Now, physical injuries, Nick, can definitely lead to serious mental injuries. I mean, if there's a physical scar, a bad one, a lot of times that will cause an emotional mental scar. But your point's well taken. You need to have a major catastrophic injury to justify bringing these cases because the value of them, the investment, the time that goes into them has to be measured against what a potential jury recovery would be or what an insurance company would pay.
The people who bring these cases can either be the individuals that were wronged themselves or, as you said, sometimes they die.
Correct.
So that comes on behalf of the family. But I'm just thinking, like, God forbid, if a loved one of mine went to the hospital, had a procedure, and died, and I went there, I mean, how am I going to, I'm going to say, okay, he died, but how do I know as a family member who wasn't there, didn't go through it, maybe wasn't in all the conversations my loved one was with the doctor? Should you automatically start asking questions? Or how do you do that if you think, gosh, he went in there, he shouldn't have died. What's going on? How do you find out? If you're from the outside in and it's your loved one who's passed away, they're not there to talk to you anymore. How do you handle something like that?
Well, you just answered your question, which is start asking questions. Ask questions of healthcare providers.
Do they have to answer to me?
They don't. A lot of times they will, though. They will give you some information. You can go get a second opinion from another healthcare provider. Maybe it's your primary care physician or that person's primary care physician. Be amazed how many times they will say, I think this is wrong. You need to get an opinion from a lawyer. And it's, I was going to say the number one thing to do is just pick up the phone and call someone like me and say, here's what's happened. I don't know what to do. I need some help, and I'm glad to give it.
Okay, yeah. I suppose if someone goes in to have their tonsils taken out and they die, probably should call you.
Yes, I would say that's probably indicative of a malpractice
Now,
case.
if they're having open heart surgery or something that's significant, that's a high-risk surgery, maybe not as clear-cut, but it could still happen in those instances.
It can. Just because it's high risk doesn't mean that gives the physician or surgeon a pass if something bad happens. I mean, there are still rules that apply to taking care of someone who's having a high-risk procedure. But the bottom line is, if you have an instinctual gut question in your mind that I need to ask somebody, something went wrong, I feel like there's like alarms going off in your head, pick up the phone and call and ask for an opinion. It costs nothing to call me.
Right.
Clients don't pay me unless I recover money for them. And it always is good to get an answer, an opinion, because the worst thing that can happen is someone say, I'm sorry you don't have a case.
Yeah, that's not
But
a
if you
big deal.
do have a case and you call, it can make the difference between not having anything and having money to tolerate what's going to be a long future set of consequences.
Yeah, usually that's what it comes down to. You're getting the monies to compensate you for future treatments, mental suffering, those types of things. All right, the other part of it, and if you're sitting at home and the lines are filling up now, but we've got some lines open, 737-7587. We'll take the calls when we come back from the break. The real emphasis here, if you're sitting and going, well, Nick and Clint are maybe hitting on something. I've got this thing, but I'm kind of busy right now. I'll put it off till next month or whatever. Go ahead and talk about statute of limitations.
Now, there's a 1-year statute of limitations. By law, you must give pre-suit notice within 1 year of the date that you discover that you've been injured, or else your claim is barred forever. You'll never get your day in court. Some people, unfortunately, they'll just sit back and wait. And there are a lot of different reasons for it, but primarily it's, I think I'll get better, or maybe a spouse says, look, we shouldn't really get a lawyer involved right now. Let's see if things will get better over time. And then after a year goes by, the spouse can't go back to work or the injury hasn't improved sufficiently, and they say, well, now it's time to go ahead and talk to a lawyer. And by that time, the case is gone. Because you slept on your rights. So we preach this every show, is you must bring your pre-suit notice within a year of discovering your injury.
Within a year. And we've had calls in this very show where I think there were cases Clint would have been interested in, and he found out that it was 2-3 years ago, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. I will say this as we go to the break. Some people may also think, and of course they're coming out of surgery and they're hurting and they don't know, and the last thing they think they can afford is an attorney to help sue. And let's just be real clear on this. If he takes your case, you don't pay him a cent unless he wins.
That is correct. It costs them nothing. I really want people to understand those two things. Is make sure you make your phone call and get your case evaluated within 1 year of the date of injury, and also make sure you understand you don't pay anything unless there is a recovery.
Yeah.
unless I recover money for you.
Yeah, so that's something to keep in mind. And because of that, by the way, he has to be more selective. You know, you have to pick the cases you think you have a good shot at, or you can't take a bunch of cases that you lose.
Right.
And he doesn't lose that often. All right, listen, we'll take a break on that note. When we come back, the number 737-7587. As soon as we come back from the break, the phone lines are open. If you want to jump in, I know it's early Wednesday, but if you have a question or comment for Clint, and we also want to get into some of his other cases. Wait till you hear some of the doozies. I always like hearing. Well, they're disturbing. Yeah. But boys, he's handled some interesting cases. All right, we'll take a break and be back with more and your calls right after this.